You must accept your death. Be freed from the night.
The developer of Bloodborne, From Software, has quite the lineage to uphold. In the 7th console generation alone, the lead game director and now president of the company, Hidetaka Miyazaki, developed the cult classic Demon's Souls in 2009. His follow-up to Demon's Souls was the multi-platform masterpiece Dark Souls in late 2011. Well, I'm happy to report that even as a veteran of the franchise, Bloodborne feels like it maintains the fundamentals of the Souls formula, but subtle changes to the methodology make it feel like a fresh and unique experience once again. Not only that, but even among its renowned lineage, Bloodborne is arguably the best game developed by the people at From Software. And let me tell you why. Simply put, Bloodborne, through metaphorical undertones of the narrative and one of the most atmospheric, twisted, and terrifying worlds I've ever seen, creates an experience like never before. There's a true sense of dread found in the streets of Yharnam, the game's main city, of which, after creating your character, you're placed in the middle. Throughout Yharnam, some type of blood plague has overrun the city, causing the inhabitants to cower in their homes for fear of turning into a beast, or worse yet, falling prey to the merciless predator of man. This is all beset by a grander, more obscure theme of theological and religious lore built on a backbone of item descriptions that give context to the superbly ominous world that surrounds you. For example, Old Yharnam, a section of the world that's already fully fallen to the effects of the blood plague and overrun by werewolves, might have items describing blood rituals performed by a church and slight foreboding references to potential gods known as the Great Ones. Only after finding these items and reading the clues will it become clear to why the chapel in Old Yharnam has a werewolf splayed open, and some of the werewolves in the area are still wearing ceremonial robes, as if they were once the clergymen performing these heinous blood rituals, but are now victims of their own monstrous rites. These contextual and nuanced details reinforce the strength of Bloodborne's atmosphere and world design. It's not through long-winded dumps of NPC dialogue or lengthy cinematic cutscenes that the narrative is delivered, but through interaction in immersive environments that the story comes alive like no other medium but gaming can portray. It's countless moments like these that give the world of Yharnam gravity and make its design feel lived in and real, no matter how fantastical and dark it may be. Now, speaking of the world design itself, first and foremost, Bloodborne's dark fantasy Victorian England-inspired world is brilliantly crafted. Quite frankly, no other game's level design is its equal. Layers of verticality create overlapping and twisting routes, and progression through an area will often lead to shortcuts, opening passages previously seen, but inaccessible. And after an hour of nail-biting exploration through a forest filled with grotesque snake creatures, it's a relief to find a shortcut and realize you've uncovered familiar surroundings once again. These design choices of overlapping shortcuts keep the areas compartmentalized and familiar while also feeling vast yet very focused. When looking at the structure of the overall world as a whole, much like the interconnected overworld of Lodran from Dark Souls, Yharnam 2 is woven together into one large landmass, but the difference is that the overworld is complemented by the convenience of a home base like the Nexus from Demon's Souls. This home base is called the Hunter's Dream, a small separate landmass apart from the interconnected world. And by discovering lanterns spread across the world of Yharnam, you'll be able to warp to and from the Hunter's Dream. Once inside the Hunter's Dream, you can distribute attribute points by leveling up with XP from killing enemies, enhance weapons, buy items from merchants, speak to NPCs, and apply runes to your character. Runes are similar to rings from the previous Souls games, meaning runes allow you to augment your character's features, like more experience from kills, healing upon visceral critical attacks, increased health or stamina, and much more. Blood gems, on the other hand, augment weapons that you've upgraded, like adding more physical or elemental damage and various other effects. The thing is, these runes that augment your character, and blood gems that modify your weapons can be swapped out or changed, but only within the Hunter's Dream. This loadout creates a sense of consequence when venturing into the hostile realm of Yharnam, and beyond that, these character modifications can also influence and alter your playstyle in combat. Now, Bloodborne's combat is more action-based than the titles that came before it. Many of these changes are subtle, but they all come together to reinforce the idea of this heavier emphasis on fast-paced action. For example, when you're hitting combat, now a segment of your health can be regenerated if you deal damage to foes before the segment slowly fades away. This encourages combat situations to maintain engagement instead of fleeing to heal, and healing items emphasize this mentality as well. Pressing triangle is now the default button to consume healing blood vials, and since the healing item has its own designated button, there's no fuddling through secondary items when you're in search of that precious healing when you need it most. These seemingly minor changes to interfacing, along with other alterations like the absence of equipment burden, not only streamline the flow of combat and complement the idea of Bloodborne's fast-paced action, but they also universalize combat and gameplay to a greater degree of balance than ever before. And a level of balance is extremely important because, like the games that came before it, Bloodborne 2 has co-op and player versus player features. You see, not only are you able to interact with players independently through specters that show you the last second of another player's life, and messages can also be left as hints for battle tactics or warnings, but you can also invade a world to kill the host, or invite other players into your world to aid in defeating Yharnam's many terrifying bosses. Which is a good thing because boss encounters, much like many battle situations in the game, are extremely high intensity, and defeating a boss is no easy feat. More often than not, when I defeat a boss, I felt like a badass, like I had achieved some miraculous feat of victory and did so by the skin of my teeth. But during my second playthrough, I laughed at bosses that had previously given me trouble. The skill and technique I had acquired over the course of the game, and especially to defeat the spectacular final boss, made me a much better hunter than when I first set out. This is because it took time for me to unlearn certain aspects of my many hours spent in the Souls games. Bloodborne is much more about reacting to combat as it's happening, as opposed to Souls' more cautionary, study, then approach to find an opening method to combat. But combat methodology isn't the only aspect that's a big change to From Software's previous work. Possibly the biggest change is the weapons themselves. Whereas before there would be a multitude of weapons as a class, like a short sword, curved sword, club, great club, and so on, and then dozens and dozens of weapons fell into that category. In Bloodborne there's a much smaller amount of total weapons. Instead of a class of weapon and then dozens that fall under that category, there's just one weapon of each type. Meaning there's just the Hunter's Axe, there's just the Saw Cleaver, there's just the Blunderbuss. But the thing is, each of these weapons can transform into multiple forms, and each form has its own pros and cons and moveset. Not only that, but these weapon transformations can be worked right into a combination of attacks, delivering a complexity and diversity to combat that's simply fantastic. Finally, apart from the weaponry, one of Bloodborne's last big changes is a set of dungeons that can be accessed from the Hunter's Dream. These are procedurally generated maps called the Chalice Dungeons. In addition to a multitude of bosses and secrets to find, the Chalice Dungeon essentially offers an obscene amount of replayability in addition to New Game Plus and beyond. Now this is normally the part of the review where I would point out some of the game's glaring flaws, but honestly, most of my gripes with Bloodborne don't influence the overall game as a whole or my relative experience with it. Sure, I didn't like how the first few bosses were all wolf-like creatures, and in this day and age, matchmaking should be way easier than it is, but even the flaws are minor. And when one of the game's worst real problems is the completely awful, bland, boring, and terrible load screens, and that's the worst you can come up with, then you know you're just nitpicking in the grand scheme of Bloodborne's excellence. When reviewing Bloodborne, I kept asking myself one question. What's its mark of excellence? Is it the razor-sharp, silky smooth controls and deep combat mechanics? Is it the mysterious narrative that baits your interest, revealing itself over time in all its twisted glory? Or is it the unrivaled level design of a breathtaking fantasy world? And the answer is that many of these things are true of Bloodborne. But to me, the true mark of excellence is the nature of which Bloodborne consumes my every thought. It's one of those rare special games that if you fall in love with its mechanics and masochistic nature, you'll find yourself counting the minutes to leave work or school just to re-enter Bloodborne's amazing world, watching videos online to master its nuanced combat mechanics, and poring over the lore to unravel the mysteries of Yharnam. Simply put, Bloodborne, like Dark Souls before it, is the new mark of excellence by which all action RPGs must be measured.